Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. The Kickoff Clash is behind us and we are now moving into the Mid-Season Madness qualifiers, week 7 of the Overwatch League. There are 13 matches this weekend, all coming from the Western region, so let's break them down, let's talk about them, and see where these teams will be following what we saw from them in the Kickoff Clash. Obviously, we're going to move into probably some new meta, potentially, and so there's always going to be something changing and always something to be looking forward to. We don't know exactly what it's going to be. We did see a lot of Reinhardt getting play time towards the end of the Kickoff Clash, so there's definitely a strong possibility for more Reinhardt as we go into this next tournament. But time will tell, so that's really all I can kind of think about. I know there's Zenyatta changes coming in, so I'm going to see a lot more Zenyatta as well, so if you're a Zen fan, be on the lookout, because we might be getting lots of cool Zen play. But let's jump in, let's talk about what we have here in this Mid-Season Madness. So we start off on Thursday with a matchup between London Spitfire and the Florida Mayhem. This, to me, is a very interesting matchup, because these are two teams coming off relatively good-looking tournaments, though neither of them, I think, are elite-level teams. I think the London Spitfire, of course, just missing out on the Kickoff Clash tournament itself. They were the 9 seed and the top 8 made the tournament, so they definitely have something to fight for. They were one of the teams really running the Reinhardt early on. They were kind of the early adapters for that composition, so something that you should be kind of looking out for. Whereas Mayhem, we're not really running it a ton. I definitely don't think it's not like they couldn't run it. I think someone has proven that he can play a number of different tank heroes, and so I'm not too concerned about whether or not he can or would be able to run the Reinhardt. I think that the question is whether or not they want to do that, and if that is the meta. But overall, I've been a little bit more impressed with the Florida Mayhem. I think this will be a pretty good match, though. It'll be interesting to see where both of these teams are at right now. But right now, I am going to give the edge to the Florida Mayhem. I'm going to give them a 3-2 win over the London Spitfire to start off their Mid-Season Madness qualifiers. Next is the San Francisco Shock versus the Dallas Fuel, two of the teams at the top of the Western region. I believe these two teams are tied for first place in terms of points with the LA Gladiators. But the Gladiators, of course, won the last tournament, so they got 3 points. Dallas got 2, Shock got 1. Undefeated Shock, though, versus the one-loss Dallas Fuel. We did see these teams match up during the Kickoff Clash tournament, and it was not a very good series for the San Francisco Shock. The Dallas Fuel were pretty dominant in that matchup, and I think that that is going to be a pretty big future that we're going to be seeing in this matchup. I think the Shock are a good team. I think they're one of the top teams in this region, but I don't know if they have what it takes to beat the Dallas Fuel. Even if we move into a Reinhardt meta, I still feel pretty good about Fearless on that hero. The Shock did pick up Mikey, so they did add someone who is more proficient on those main tank heroes, as opposed to Kalush, who is someone who's historically just been an off-tank player. So there's a possibility that we see some decent Reinhardt play out of the Shock, but obviously without Super, I don't feel like they are as likely to be a dominant Reinhardt team. Don't think they are necessarily going to be bad on the hero, but I just don't feel like they're going to be a dominant force like they would have been in the past. And the way that the Fuel dismantled them in the Kickoff Clash is a little too much for me to ignore, so I am going to give the Dallas Fuel the win here. I'm going to say it's a 3-1. I think the Fuel are just that good, and I think despite the Shock being a top-level team, there seems to be a bit of a gap even between Dallas and the third and fourth, fifth best teams in the league, or at least in the Western region, and so for me, got to go the Fuel with a 3-1 over the Shock. Final match on Thursday is the Washington Justice versus the New York Excelsior. I'm recording this video on Monday, and I only say this because there's a possibility that we see some changes to the New York Excelsior roster before their match on Thursday. They, today, as I'm recording this video, have announced that they have parted ways with Vulcan. He was on a 30-day contract. His contract ended, and so now he is no longer on the team. What that means to me, or what my assumption of that is that they have another player on the lineup somewhere, because the league minimum is 6 players, and they right now only have 5. So somewhere they have another player. We don't know if it's a main support, if it's an off-tank to replace Vulcan, if it's under DPS. We really have no idea right now. And so we have to kind of assume that right now they're still going to be rolling with the same 5 players they've been rolling with so far. Now, if they do move into a Reinhardt meta, I think that you have to feel somewhat confident about Kellen being your only tank, because it looks right now like Reinhardt is good and Kellen has been a player who has struggled a bit, but we know that he is good on those main tank heroes. That is what his bread and butter is. That's what he comes from. He's a main tank player historically. That's what he's known for. He's known for his Winston. He's known for his Reinhardt. Those are the heroes he's the best at. But I still don't really feel great about where this team is at in their support line. I don't love Gangnam Jin and Myeongbong as a duo, because I think that they are just basically running 2 players who are not going to be very good in either of their roles. I think Gangnam Jin is the better flex support for this team, and they don't have him playing flex support. Justice, on the other hand, I think are more flexible. They have a solid support line. They have pretty flexible DPS lines, something that New York also doesn't really have. And I still feel pretty good. You know, Mag versus Kellen, those are pretty 2 similar tanks, but I've seen more out of Mag so far. So as much as I would love to see the NYXL take this series, I don't really think it's likely. I think the Justice are just too good, and I think they're better at more roles. Even where they are kind of evenly matched up, I still think that the Justice get the slight edge there. And so I think the Justice take the series. I'll give New York a map. I'll say it's a 3-1 for the Justice, but ultimately I do think this is a series that will go the way of the Justice. Moving on to Friday, we kick off with the London Spitfire versus the Toronto Defiant. This is a game that is very interesting to me, and so it is my first big pick game for the weekend. I really don't know what to expect out of this game, because what we've seen from both of these teams are essentially 2 teams on opposite trajectories. London seems to be on the up. They seem to be a team that is impressing more and more as time goes on, and they look to be a little bit better than they were at the beginning of the season. They know it works for them. If Reinhardt is something we see a lot of, then you have to feel pretty good about London, because that's what they have been running for pretty much the entire tournament. That's what they are the most comfortable in, so that's what they've been running. Toronto has been up and down. They just got rid of their head coach. There were reports about issues, but behind the scenes. Muse hasn't really been playing as much recently, and if we get into a Reinhardt meta, you'd want him in over Hotba. So there are a lot of questions for me about this team and about what to expect from this team. I don't really know what is really going to happen. What we're going to see, who we're going to see, how we're going to see it. All that type of stuff is still up in the air. But right now, I think I would have to still give the edge to the Toronto Defiant. I think on paper they have the better roster. And I think that even in the struggles potentially with a new meta, I think that you have to look at what we've seen from their team as a whole. They have had good games against some good opponents. And I think that ultimately it's going to come down to those neutral matchups, those neutral deciding factors, right? We don't know for sure Reinhardt's going to be meta. I just kind of get this feeling that we've been seeing a lot more of him, so maybe he is where the meta goes. I think you can probably still get away with playing some of your Winston comps and your Zarya comps, because I don't think we've seen those really get nerfed. And so I'm curious to see what happens in this matchup. But I definitely want to give the edge to the Toronto Defiant, just because I like what they've done a little bit more. I think it's close. I think it's a very, very, very close matchup. I'm going to go a 3-2, however, in favor of the Toronto Defiant. Second match on Friday is the Boston Uprising versus the Atlanta Reign. Boston... If you ask me who would win this game, the last day of the Kickoff Clash qualifiers, I may have gone with Boston because Atlanta was playing pretty poorly at the time. Now, things are a little bit different. Atlanta had a very strong performance in the Kickoff Clash tournament itself, obviously getting 3rd overall, which is a pretty good finish from them. Definitely something I look at as a good showing from a team that had really managed to do a lot of things right in the tournament, and that had really kind of put together a pretty good result, considering they had not looked very good leading up to that. Boston, I still don't feel great about. I think Boston looks okay, but I don't feel confident enough to say that they're going to have a, good win. And it's tough for me to see Boston winning this game. Yes, they have some good wins, and they're not, a bad team necessarily. But Atlanta, to me, just looks better right now. So I'm going to give the edge to the Atlanta Reign. 3-1 victory for them over the Uprising. Final match on Friday is the LA Gladiators versus the Vancouver Titans. I mean, this is the best team in the Western region and the worst team in the Western region going up against each other. I don't think there's much of a question about what happens here. I think the Gladiators take the series in a 3-0. I don't think it's very close. I don't think the Titans look very good. It is going to be DPay versus former teams. There's going to be a little bit of spice there. But I think the Gladiators right now just look better, and I think they're going to take the series over the Titans. very convincingly. Moving on to Saturday, Washington Justice versus Houston Outlaws. This game, to me, has the potential to be a banger. This one is very hard to predict. And so, once again, here we have big pick game. I'm incredibly interested in this game because, based on what we've seen so far, I think that the better team of the two is the Houston Outlaws. I think we've seen more from them. I think they've looked better when we've seen them. And I think that we have just seen a much better look from them in the Kickoff Clash. The Justice have a much more flexible team, and that is where I think that they have the advantage over the Outlaws, potentially. If we move into a Reinhardt meta, I don't really feel great about Houston, right? Houston only really looks good on the Doomfist comps, which is bad when you consider the fact that Piggy doesn't play the Doomfist. When he comes in, he plays Sigma or Diva, stuff like that. Really mostly just comes in to play Sigma and the occasional Zarya. And they don't look very good when he comes in and does that. So I definitely have concerns about this Outlaws team, but they are, for all intents and purposes, a really good Doomfist team. And so if Doomfist is still a very good composition and still a good pick that you can use in this tournament, well then Houston I think will still be a good team because you have Merritt and Pelican who've been playing at a high level who look good when they come in, and you still have Lastro and Iris who've been looking very good as well. It really comes down to this tank line question of what's good, what's bad, and if Rush kind of counters the Doomfist comps as well as we think it might, well then the Justice putting Mag on Rhine could be the solution. Will the Justice do that? Who knows? They might just opt to just keep playing Mag Winston, and maybe they just lose because they do that. But I always like to give teams the benefit of the doubt that they will make changes. What we saw from the Justice in the Kickoff Clash against the Shock was very, very good. They looked very good in their first matchup in the Kickoff Clash. So, yes, they struggled in the bottom when they went to play Florida. I think some of that could have been just kind of a sense of like defeat from losing to the Shock the way they did. Could be that Florida is just really that good. There's a lot of factors that could have gone into it, but the Outlaws, to me, their weaknesses and their lack of flexibility are something that it's difficult for me to want to pick them in the first match of the Midseason Madness for them. I need to see them adapt. I need to see what they're able to do before I feel confident picking them. So for this matchup, I'm going to go in favor of the Washington Justice by a score of 3-2. Next, we have the LA Gladiators taking on the Paris Eternal. Gladiators really lucking out this first weekend, playing the Vancouver Titans and the Paris Eternal, the two teams with the worst record in the Western region. So no surprise, I think, here when I say the Gladiators should win this game. I think they will win this game. And I think they're going to win this game pretty convincingly, considering how well they looked in the Kickoff Clash. I don't expect them to drop a map for the Eternal, so I'm going to go 3-0 in favor of the Gladiators for this one. Final match on Saturday is the Atlanta Reign versus Dallas Fuel. These two teams played during the lower bracket finals in the Kickoff Clash. It's pretty close for a couple of maps, but by the end it was a pretty convincing win for the Dallas Fuel, and I think the Dallas Fuel should be the favorites again in this matchup. I don't think it's going to be a super one-sided dominant affair. I think these are two teams who, in the right maps, in the right metas, it can be very, very close. We saw the Reign take control from the Fuel, and then we saw a pretty close Circuit Royale, for example. It really wasn't until Coliseo that the Fuel just rolled over the Reign, and it kind of ended. So I think it should be somewhat close, but I think it will be a win for the Dallas Fuel. I am going to say a 3-1. That's what the score was the last time they played, so feels like a pretty logical choice for this one. Moving on to Sunday, Florida Mayhem take on the Toronto Defiant. This is another game that I think could be pretty close. I have these two teams relatively close together in my power rankings. But I feel like it is likely to be a win for the Florida Mayhem. I think they just look better right now. I think that there's always something going on where you have to feel pretty confident about this Mayhem team. The way they've played, they look pretty good. And they've looked better and better as the season has progressed, in my opinion. I think that they have been a pretty solid team. They've had a pretty solid performance so far. Toronto, I still have a lot of questions about, like I said before. They have a lot of changes going on. I don't know if necessarily they're going to look as good in this first weekend. So I'm going to give this one to the Mayhem a score of 3-2 and hope that it's a good matchup because the rest of Sunday does not look super promising. Second match on Sunday is the San Francisco Shock against the Boston Uprising. I think this will be a pretty one-sided affair. Then the Shock are pretty significantly better than the Uprising. The Uprising have not impressed me that much this season. They've had a couple of decent showings, but overall nothing too impressive. So I think the Shock take this one. I think they take it very convincingly. I'm going to go Shock 3-0 over the Uprising. No more Striker in the Uprising, so you can't say it's like a revenge match for him because he's gone now. So there you go. Third match on Sunday is the Paris Eternal versus the New York Excelsior. In my power rankings, I talked about this being a very interesting match to watch because we have two teams who, New York has one win, Paris has no wins. One of these teams is going to be able to finally get themselves somewhere in a better position, like New York maybe gets themselves to a 2-win team that puts them on the same record potentially as the Boston Uprising. Maybe they can use that to kind of start to climb their way up slowly but surely. Tough for sure because they have a lot of good teams in this region they have to compete with, but they potentially have the talent where if they can get this roster right, even down the stretch, it may be enough for them to make a nice late season run and potentially find themselves among that kind of echelon of top teams. For Paris, this is kind of their first really winnable game they have. They have basically played all of the good teams this season. They played, I believe, last stage, everybody that made the Kickoff Clash with the exception of the Gladiators and maybe the Justice. I don't remember exactly who it was they played. I think it was somebody else. But they played everybody made the Kickoff Clash last stage except for two teams. And so they didn't play any of those bottom level competitions. They didn't play your... London. The London looks pretty good. They didn't play your Vancouvers, your New Yorks, anything like that. So Paris has a possibility and has the chance in this tournament cycle to get a win. And that might be a big thing for them of getting their first win. And right now, I think the Paris Eternal are looking better than New York. I think that the Eternal have looked better so far. I think they have had more decent results, despite the fact that New York has a win and Paris doesn't. New York's win was over a really bad Vancouver team. And that was not a win that sold me and made me think, oh, New York's going to finally put it together. No, it was not a very good win for them. They didn't look very good. So I feel pretty good in picking the Eternal for this one. I think it'll be probably a 3-1 if I had to guess. So that's the score I'm going to go with here. I just don't feel great about New York right now. Paris, I don't feel great about either, but I feel better about them than I do New York. Final match of the weekend is the Houston Outlaws versus the Vancouver Titans. And I think we're unfortunately going to go out with a whimper and not with a bang because this is going to be a pretty one-sided affair. The Houston Outlaws are a good team, and the Vancouver Titans are not. And so I think that this is a game that will very easily go the favor of the Houston Outlaws. I'm going to say 3-0 for this one. So here's all my picks real quick. You can see them up on your screen in case you wanted just to get them all there, but that's gonna be all for this video for today. Hope you all enjoyed. If you like this video, consider liking and subscribing for more like it in the future. Big week for Overwatch, of course. We're getting more Overwatch 2 news tomorrow, so hopefully have something out for that on Friday. But I'm in a little bit of a busy place right now, so might not be until next week, but I will get it out as soon as I can. But that's gonna be all from me for today. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time. Bye-bye.